World War I is often left in the shadow of a more massive and terrifying World War II. Historians and documentaries tend to focus on the latter, but you can't talk about one without the other, since World War I created the prerequisites for the second conflicts. But on its own, it's still interesting, since it led to a lot of innovation in warfare, and in addition, made countries learn means of mobilizing and rebuilding their economy, which are used till this day. That's why you can and should take a look at it. In one of our previous videos, we lived a day in the shoes of a British soldier. Now it's time for a German. What were the regular guys in the trenches thinking? What did they eat? Why were their dugout houses considered the pinnacle of engineering? And how did they even manage to fight against the entire world? Marco Reus will help us answer all these questions and more. The year is 1916. It's July 6th, and our pal Marco is laying low in the trenches near a French town, Bar-le-Hertog, which is located 150 kilometers away from Paris. 5 days ago, the united British and French forces began advancing. Their goal is to drive German troops out of eastern French territories. This advance will go down in history as the Battle of the Somme and will take over 1 million lives. Germans, forced to fight on 2 different fronts, will end up giving up their positions. But our Reus doesn't know that yet. At the moment, he is among the 10 German divisions who are trying to defend against 24 British and French divisions. But Marco is ready, since his spirit is strong. And that's because he thinks that he is defending his country. That's a common thing with this war. Every side thought they were the defenders. Unlike with World War II, where there was a clear aggressor. Ironically, both French and German soldiers strongly believed that they defended against invaders. In Marco Reus's case, it's even more ironic, since he was defending his country on another country's territory. But wait, the irony doesn't stop here. In this situation, Germans had more right to call the war defensive. Bismarck created a policy in German, which was still relevant at the time. This policy was, "We won't bother you if you let us develop." Unfortunately, by that time almost all colonies were already split between France and England, and although they were very fast in complementing Germany, they weren't as fast at sharing and letting it develop. War was hung over Europe since the 19th century. The only question was, who is going to ally? Germany wasn't very lucky since they went against many superpowers at once. But there were still a few things keeping the army's spirits up. First of all, our Marco Reus was certain that they would be victorious. Why wouldn't they be? Only 40 years ago, Germans easily defeated France in a war, which led to the German Empire being born. Secondly, Marco knew about the Great Schleifen Plan, who modified all of the best German tactics. The plan consisted of a quick seizure of France through neutral Belgium. Taking Paris out of the war would make it undesirable for England and basically grant Germany their victory. Even though in 1916 Germany faced some issues, they still managed to cross Belgium and gain a strong position in France. Finally, there was also German Empire's propaganda machine at play. It made sure that every German knew about their superiority. And they were kinda right. When it came to dugouts, trenches, and other defense mechanisms, Germans were undoubtedly the best from the engineering perspective. At the root of every victory are the people, and the German Empire had no problem with that. Fun fact, long before World War I, the British government was studying other military systems from around the world to draw inspiration from, and the German one was considered the best. However, Britain was unable to adapt it, since Germany had mandatory drafts. Our Marco Reus had already served 2 years, back when he was 19, and was sent into reserves. When the war began in 1914, along with 7,000 active soldiers, they mobilized 4 million more. And the icing on the cake was that those 4 million, unlike in Britain, didn't need training. Those were lads ready to be sent to the front lines, who already had military experience. That probably also added a bit to Marco's spirit. For him, serving in the army wasn't something new. But unfortunately, for the regular soldiers, problems with frontline levels and strategies weren't the priority. Their main problem was fleas. There is photographic evidence from the German trenches of World War I, and all of it suggests that fighting fleas was a daily routine. Marco fought in a traditional way, by cauterizing the seams of his clothes with a candle. However, clothes would often catch fire during this and would need to be repaired. The commanders even gave soldiers special time to do so. World War I became the first conflict when soldiers' personal hygiene was paid attention to. No one wants to have thousands of losses due to malaria or infections, which could be prevented. That's why in Reus's trench and all others, besides personal hygiene products, were laundries. Germans, at least during the first years of the war, were leaders in safety. The soldiers bathed, were clean and even had special rituals. One of them was shaving an officer. It happened in a dugout and was considered a great way to keep up the fighting spirit. That was needed since Germans had enough problems, probably the most important of them being supplies. Remember in our previous video we said that British soldiers ate meat and plenty of other food? Well, our Marco Royce was in a worse position. By mid-1916, the supply of meat to the army was only 31% compared to peacetime. There was 51% less fish and 20% less rice, eggs, cheese, and other side dishes. But the army and the civilians mainly ate potatoes. However, Germans did have a pretty elegant solution. The government put a lot of money into developing recipes. Housewives were taught how to cook without flour, so they could instead send it to the fronts. Farms were asked to give away all eggs, and factories for the first time ever started hiring women. Our Marco's wife even worked at a bank, which was strictly prohibited only 5 years prior. In the end, all the changes will result in the problem, with supplies being eliminated by 1918. But in 1916, our Marco is having a hard time. We should also mention that articles about German cannibals during World War I are far from the truth. On the contrary, Germans acted like gentlemen more often than members of the Triple Entente. For example, there was a time when the British artillery destroyed a French village, and German soldiers, who were defending it, not only helped civilians get to a safe place, but later came back and helped rebuild their homes. It is possible one of them was Marco Royce, since by then the Allies' attack near Bar flopped, and he had some time to flee. Battles during World War I were eerily similar. 2 trenches were dug. The space between them was called No Man's Land, and armies waited for the opponent's move. No Man's Land was called that for a reason, since in 90% of cases, those who dared to leave the trench and step foot on it were mercilessly fired at by the enemy and lost. Once again, Germans, along with Marco, came up with an elegant solution. At night, the elite German units would often come very close to the opponent's trenches and would start a fuss. After that, the attack would begin on No Man's Land, since the French and British soldiers wouldn't be able to properly fight back being attacked from 2 places simultaneously. Our Royce often went on such missions. Other countries will also start using this tactic later. Photographic evidence suggests that German trenches looked more like comfortable housing. Thanks to the engineering genius, even larger forces got overwhelmed in them and stopped fighting. But probably the only thing that concerned Marco was the aviation and other tech. Although as of the beginning of World War I, Germany was the largest economy in continental Europe, England still had an even larger one. And together with France and ally USA, the Triple Entente were absolute leaders and basically showered Germany with bombs. Unfortunately, regular folks like our Marco couldn't really change that, and they had other things to do. The chance of dying from, for example, trench foot, was the same as in the battlefield. This disease caused legs to basically die off because of lack of movement in bad conditions. During World War I, this disease was a bitch. And in Royce's trenches, officers checked soldiers' feet every day to make sure they were clean and healthy. The procedure usually took place in the afternoon, since during the day, Marco and other soldiers slept. Most attacks happened either during the night or at dawn, so keeping up with a traditional daily regime during war was useless. Royce and his fellow soldiers spent nights either in arms or playing cards if it wasn't their shift. By 1916, people were visibly tired of war, so times when soldiers didn't obey the command became more frequent. For example, in one of the neighboring regions, French and German soldiers announced truce and played football. Germany won with the final score of 3-2, and our Marco definitely knows that this happened for real and is not some folktale. Last Christmas, he himself sent sausages to British and French soldiers as a gift. In return, he got chocolate and a card. Even more often, truce was called when cleaning up trenches. There were enough dead in there to kill more people on both sides than the enemy's bullets. Also, by that time, the regular folks started to realize that they were fighting for some pricks sitting in castles. Marco even heard about 48 German soldiers who were executed for violating chain of command and telling superiors to F off. But our Royce is a responsible German and doesn't do stuff like that. However, he was doubting the theory about defensive war on another country's territory that was supposed to last a couple of months and is already on for 2 years. More and more modern historians are leaning toward the idea that this was the main reason Germany lost, since when the peace treaty was signed, the German forces were only a couple hundred kilometers away from Paris and 1,000 away from Berlin. This was clearly not a roaring victory, and British generals openly admitted that they wouldn't be able to take Berlin, or even enter German territory for that matter. There is even a backstab theory. This theory was actively used in Germany's propaganda before World War II. It says that Germany only lost because they got backstabbed by cowards in the government. This is kinda true, since before the US joined the war, both sides had equally drained resources and were ready for a truce. But together, the Allied forces were insanely powerful, and Germany lost for a reason. This, however, doesn't detract from Marco Reus's service. Having 12% of the world's GDP versus 40% in the hands of the Allies, Germany didn't just defend themselves. They managed to do it on French territory, even with all ports blocked, world's trade embargo, and dozens of other problems. The Germans defeated Russia, managing to fight on two fronts all through this mess. Having a much worse diet and ammunition, trained German soldiers, like our Marco Reus, managed to keep the front lines afloat, and also managed to care about their hygiene, fallen comrades, and didn't become drunk off their mind with schnapps. Textbooks are always written by the victors. So are you really surprised that the role of Germany was belittled? In reality, the regular folks didn't think about the geopolitics. They thought about coming home to their loved ones. This thought had no nationality or ideology. See you later, friends.